We forecast prices and fundamentals. Whether you're a trader, producer, or consumer, you can hedge your bets with Montel's diverse forecasting portfolio. Contact us at sales@montelnews.com for more info and a free trial.
Hello listeners and welcome to the Montel Weekly Podcast. Bring you energy matters in an informal setting. This week's pod returns to the Nordic power market. In particular, we will discuss the widening differences between prices in different areas in the region amid interconnector outages, limited nuclear availability in Sweden and Finland, as well as a hydropower glut in Norway. We have two of the Nordic region's most experienced and respected analysts joining us this week. First of all, Eylert Ellefsen, a senior analyst, also known as Mr. Hydrology at Energy Quantified. Welcome back on the Montel Weekly Podcast, Eylert. Always good to have you on board.
Thank you, Richard. It's nice to be having a hydrology comment. I will also focus somewhat on the price outlooks too. So I think this is also of my interest.
Perfect, absolutely. But let's get to it then, Eylert, and start us off with the hydrology. What's happening? We see reservoir levels have fallen slightly in week 33, but they're still very strong. So, are we still in this extreme situation? And how long will it last?
Yeah, I think we are still in a very extreme situation, but it's very interesting that we now, for the first time since the spring melt started, that we had declining reservoir numbers. But this is after a very dry week. And I think in general that this is not over. I see still some rising reservoir levels to come this autumn, by normal weather conditions, of course.
You expect this locked-in hydropower glut in Norway to continue then?
Yes, because if we go to the details of Norway, we are currently 9% higher than normal, which means about 9 terawatt hours. And the normal curve of the reservoir is increasing from week 33 until mid of October. And I think this will also then be the case this year if we get normal weather conditions. Of course, the export volume means somewhat for the reservoir curve and the production of hydropower. But in general, I don't expect that we'll get more than 3,000 to 4,000 megawatt export as an average throughout, let's say, nearly until New Year. And this means that the production will not be higher than the inflows before mid of October, start of October, if we have normal conditions, even by rather strong hydropower production and nearly max output on the export cables.
So this is, in effect, very bearish then?
Well, by normal conditions, it's still bearish, I would say. I have looked a bit on the precipitation variations that we can expect from now until end of October. I'm not looking further ahead, but just until end of October. And I see that the variation band is about plus minus 6 terawatt hours. So that it can be 6 terawatt hours wetter than normal or 6 terawatt hours drier than normal in Norway until end of October, which will be good news if we have drier conditions. Then we will come much closer to the normal reservoir curve and we will see increased water values if we get into a dry scenario. But if we get into a normal or wet scenario, of course, wet will be very bearish, even longer than end of October. But I don't see, if we get into a wet scenario, there will be a lot of spilled water outside the power plants. And I think we can see on a national level reservoir number close to 95%.
Wow, going into sort of mid to late October. I mean, that's quite extreme. And we'll see what, as you say, the hydropower producers would then let this excess water run in effect into the ocean. But what does this mean for prices. I mean, we've seen the Nordic system price fell 84% year on year to 5.6 euros a megawatt hour in Q2. Could you say what you expect to happen for the rest of the year in a dry and wet scenario?
Well, of course, in a wet scenario, I think the low prices will continue as we see now. It's important to comment on the reservoir fillings that are a bit different in one region or one price zone, that's NO4, with a multi-year reservoirs, so they can still save some water. But in all other price zones, we are now already in the level of 92, 93, 94% filling. So they cannot increase the reservoir levels so much, which means that they have to produce what they get into the reservoirs. And if it get wet and increased inflows, they just have to produce, if possible. If the market is large enough, that means if the consumption is high enough, or if they have some capacity on the export cables. But I think, first of all, by normal conditions, I believe that we will have the low water values until end of September. I don't see any reason for increasing the water values really before end of September, because then coming to October, we will see declining reservoir fillings by normal conditions, and then there could be a possibility for increasing the water values and the price zone prices in Norway.
So we could eventually see an upturn from October onwards. But you mentioned in a dry scenario, this would be good news. I presume that's for the hydropower producers in Norway, who are suffering very much with these very low prices. But conversely, industry is maybe quite good news for industry, these low prices. So it brings me to my next question, Eylert, about demand and industrial consumption amid the COVID crisis. Have you seen a strong reduction here so far in the first half of the year? And what do you expect for the rest of the year?
Yeah, I haven't focused so strongly on the consumption in Norway really, but I think it's about 2 or 3% lower than if we didn't have the COVID-19 infection. So I think it doesn't mean so much for the hydro situation. It means something that you cannot produce as much as by normal consumption, but I don't see that have any effect really on the water values, given the large uncertainty we see in the precipitation possibilities.
That's the key driver here, not so much on the demand side. How do you see other elements like wind, maybe increased wind production coming in? That's,
of course, more topic for SA1 and SA2, the Swedish price zones. So, yeah. Of course, it means something for the Norwegian price zones, but it doesn't mean so much. So it's for Sweden. It means something. If you have precipitation, high reservoirs in SA1, SA2, and strong wind, of course, the prices will be kept maybe even lower than by. So it's more comes from Sweden, this problem, the next few months.
Absolutely, and I think we'll continue this discussion with our next guest. But in the meantime, Eylert, thank you very much for joining the Montel Weekly podcast.
Okay, thank you, Richard.
Our next guest is Tor Reier Lilleholt, who's head of analysis at Wattsight. A warm welcome to you, Tor Reier, and welcome back on the pod.
Yes, thank you.
How are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. And hopefully it has been a nice summer now, so we are ready for the autumn, for new challenges.
Absolutely. So our previous guest talked a lot about the hydrological situation in Norway in particular. How do you view this now and going forward?
Of course, it has been a very interesting year, and of course we are very happy that we end up with a very good estimates for what we see is the actual numbers. The final answer, I think, is the inflow and what we are able to produce in this system. And again, the hydro reservoir forecast is important, and the hydro has been extreme during the both winter and the summer. So it's okay to see that now we are new steps now to try to look forward. Some of the areas have more control now, so we are very on the edge now, because we could go both ways still in the next couple of months, because September, October is a very wet month, especially in Norway. So if you have a dry solution or a wet solution, we could still see very low prices, and we can also go very fast up at alternative prices like the gas marginal cost. So it will be interesting still for a couple of months in the hydro situation. But you have to mention now that the official numbers in the hydro reservoirs are less uncertain. So a lot of uncertainty is moved away from the market now, because it's only soil and groundwater, and that is not, it's limited uncertainties in those reservoirs.
Absolutely. So, Tor Reier, do you think then that the Nordic system price, which, fell massively year on year in the second quarter of the year, do you expect it to remain in single digits for the rest of the third quarter?
It could happen, but as I mentioned here, you need a wet scenario, because we have now started to get some control. And if we continue with normal, maybe a bit drier than normal, we could rather easily see prices going up and higher than 10 euros. And the system price is also affected a bit by the very high, more thermal production or capacity prices we see in Sweden and Finland, Baltic area. So, of course, the southern part of Norway could be below 10 euros for a longer time. But in total, I think we are going to some extent higher than 10 euros rather quick now. And we are already started this week, I think.
So when you say control, you mean that's when the hydropower producers can judge when to use their reserves or not? Is that correct?
Yeah. I have very often said in the market that we need hydrological balance in Norway alone below 10 terawatt hours in our numbers to get the control, because then you could have a chance to choose to wait to produce later. Because that is the very important thing here, to have an option to produce later and to see prices at a higher level. You could start changing the water values. But if you see that the hydro reservoirs will be full, but we still see potential for in some of the areas, NO1, NO2 and NO5 at least, you could get close to 100% if the autumn is a bit wet, and then you have the alternative close to zero again. So it's very digital, that we can go from still very low prices, or we could also go up to very high prices that we have not seen for a while, especially in the southern part of Norway, because we will connect to marginal cost for gas sometime in the future here. But it could go faster than we see in the market at the moment, but it could also go a lot slower.
I mean, I think we've seen huge price variations internally across the Nordic region this year. Is this something we should expect going forward, or was there kind of anything that made this year more extreme than normal, Tor Reier?
Definitely, this year is extreme. I could just start some of the extreme things we have recognized there. You could start with the extreme temperatures you had in the winter. We followed up with the extreme high snow accumulation, especially for Norway. And you also continued with record low nuclear production in Sweden, both due to very low prices, but also due to more maintenance. And we also had the extreme high limitations in the exchange capacity. So that is very important for the price deviations in the Nordic area. And in the end, you see extreme spilling of water and also extreme prices. So the prices in both Sweden, I think, and in Norway has been rather extreme. And the deviation between Sweden and, for example, SA3 and NO1 is very extreme. Sometimes it's closer together, but at the moment, you see this week, it's very high. And I see that there will be some more maintenance or more production from nuclear in Sweden back from maintenance next week. We also will see a bit more wind. That will help. And you also have a bit higher or lower temperatures, so the consumption increase. That helps the connection between Sweden and Norway as well, so you could get more exchange. So in total, I think if we continue with the wet weather we see in the forecast now, we might maintain the pressure on the southern part of Norway, but the pressure on the upside, on the capacity prices in Sweden or also Finland and Baltic might be a bit lower. So I think the prices will go a bit closer together in the following weeks. But we are still have some pressure in the south of Norway, and I think the increase in water values might be postponed a bit with the weather forecast we see at the moment, if it's delivered, of course.
So when we're talking, I mean, both you and Eylert talk about the increasing in water values. This is the increase in the potential return for the stored hydropower. Is that correct, Tor Reier?
Yes,
yeah.
And we need to see the hydro reservoirs start declining. So that's why I talked about we need to go below 10 terawatt hours for a period before we could see more control, because it's on the limit now. If it's a wet scenario, wet weather, a couple of weeks, we are suddenly up at 100% again in some of the price areas, and then we'll maintain the very low prices in some areas.
So, I mean, this is interesting. I think 2020 will probably always be seen as quite a unique year just because of the corona crisis. But what you're saying, Tor Reier, is also because there are extremes in terms of interconnector outages and also limited nuclear availability in Sweden and Finland. So it's a kind of one-off in that respect as well, if I understand you correctly.
Yeah, of course. But you could say also that it will be the normal that there will be a lot of things happening in the market because it's a complex market. Always something will happen in both directions on the prices. So it could be new things happening in the next year. But I think the hydro situation was extreme. And I don't think that will be the normal in the future, of course. So
absolutely, we shall keep our eyes closely peeled on that. But if we continue talking about price differences, the spread between the Nordic and the German front-year power prices are currently close to 20 euros a megawatt hour. Do you expect this gap to be closed anytime soon? What are the key drivers here?
Yeah. I have seen lately, looking back during the summer as well, some periods where the Nordic market don't follow the fuel prices. So that is a bit interesting because has increased the deviations, because I think Germany, the German market has followed the CO2 prices, gas prices very closely, but the Nordic markets has very often not done that. So you have very often seen a bit more bearish market in the Nordic market, even though the CO2 prices has increased. I believe that sometime in the future now we will connect more to the gas prices, and that will happen when the control in the hydro system is better, of course. And you see the prices for the winter are up at 40 euros on the marginal cost for gas, and of course that is the upper limit we could expect for the Nordic markets, but we are way off on that. We are down to closer to 20 euros. So of course there's potential there, but we need to see the hydro on a lot better control, and maybe down to minus in the hydrological balance. That will help the situation. But of course, into delivery, I think we will see this deviation between German market and the Nordic market to be closer together. But not much. It will be up to 5 to 10 euros less, I believe. So, but it has increased a lot during the past month. Of course, you started the year, I think, up at 18 euros as well. So we had a maximum up at above 20 euros on this spread, and we are still close to 20. I think that is a high number in the future. But we have seen this year that has been the extreme year in the Nordic. That is the example that you could get up to 20 euros in deviations. But that will not be the normal in the future, I believe.
Interesting. I mean, do you think then that the short-run marginal cost of coal-fired plants is not that relevant anymore, Tor Reier?
Definitely, it's relevant for a lower amount of hours, because you still need some coal production, and you see that it's gas and lignite that are competing with each other now. So that is also interesting, because gas is taking a lot more hours of the production volumes. Also, lignite will be removed already this summer, and last summer you saw that, and that is important for the CO2 volumes again. So that is also why we see a downside in the emissions from CO2. So that is also interesting to see how that will develop, because the CO2 market is still very important for both gas and coal marginal cost. And again, I think coal is still in the different price mix.
Yeah, so we still need to keep an eye very much on what's happening in the old dirty fuel market. But we've talked a lot about supply here, Tor Reier. What's happening on the demand side? I mean, have we seen much of the impact? I know we talked early in the year about the impact on demand from the COVID-19 pandemic, but what are you seeing here?
Then you have to look into future, because there's a lot of things happening if you look 5, 10, 15 years ahead. So that would be very interesting. But if you look more short term, of course, we have seen that the COVID-19 has affected the Nordic market very limited, I think. It's a lot more things happening on the European consumption. We see also the industry has been more affected in Europe. So the industrial consumption is going down. But that again is affecting the Nordic market, but you see the price deviations. So consumption in the Nordic market will definitely increase. We look at a lot of different things triggering that. You see new industry connected to Norway. We have type of battery factories that will be established in Norway, for example, using more consumption. All the electricity from electric vehicles and electrification all over in the oil sector and different areas. So I think more development we see now, the higher the consumption will be. So that will also meet the supply side from production. So demand is also increasing in this system. So I think in the new version of the long-term price forecast, we have to increase the consumption estimates, and that will maintain high expectation for prices also in the future, even though we are building out a lot of new renewables.
You know, it's very interesting to say, because you see that some of the heavy industry, traditional heavy industry in the Nordic region, such as aluminium or paper and pulp, their demand may be falling slightly, but these new industries are growing, as you mentioned, new digital, in part of the new digital revolution. So that sees the arrows for demand pointing upwards there then, Tor Reier, if I get you correctly.
Yeah, so it will be very interesting to follow the market in the next 5-10 years, because I think there will see a lot of changes, and also new technology will definitely rule this market. We can also go into the hydrogen and the battery technology could be definitely changing the market.
I think there's certainly a lot to talk about in coming podcasts with you, Tor Reier, so I look forward to discussing these in more detail. But thank you very much for joining us this week, Tor Reier, and have a great weekend.
Yes, thank you. Same to you. Bye-bye.
That's about all from the Montel Weekly Podcast this week. A big thank you to Tor Reier and Eylert for an in-depth discussion on the multiple factors currently driving the Nordic power prices. You can also listen to Eylert and several other speakers at Montel's Nordic Energy Day webinar next week on the 27th of August. Remember to keep up to date with all our stories on Montel News, follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts from. Thank you and goodbye.